I spent most of my childhood winters with my grandmother in northern Sweden. She and her two sisters lived on the outskirts of a small town in an area called Blakulla, or the Blue Hills. They had this small grey house. They did have electricity, but only at night, and the heat was powered by a furnace. In the daytime, the Blue Hills was this calm and serene place, where you could almost hear the snow melt. But at night, it was just this endless field of white, fading into darkness. It was the most beautiful and terrifying place I've ever been. I remember one night in particular when I was about 7 years old. My grandmother took me ice fishing, and as I sat there staring up at the stars with a hot dog in my hand, I noticed one star brighter than all the others. It twinkled like a burning candle. It was green. "That's the green star," my grandmother said. "It can only be seen in special places far up north, and only by special people. Don't look at it too long, or it'll turn the snow green. Thrice blinks the green star, misfortune becomes you." It was nothing but superstition, but I did as she told me. She gave me an old cast iron key to hold and play with. It was some sort of good luck charm. Still, all I wanted to do was to stare at the bright green star, twinkling away up there. There was something magical to it. As the years passed, I stopped going to my grandmother in the winter. Instead, there was school, tests, girlfriends, and sports taking up all my time. But when she turned ill, we had one last chance to visit her. I'm so glad I did. She was in good spirits to the very end. She passed away right there in that grey house in the middle of nowhere, the same month as her two sisters. Her ashes were spread on the lake. The green star was still there. I graduated, went to college, and got my first job. I got engaged to my girlfriend Samantha, or Sam, at 24. For our 5-year anniversary, we were planning a trip to Barcelona. Then came the COVID pandemic. Throwing out our plans, we had to find something else to do. Our first idea was to get diving certificates, but the restrictions in our area were too tough. Instead, we decided to go winter camping all on our own. Sam found a lodge we could rent, and we both had a few days off of work to cash in. We managed to get a 5-day weekend, and we'd spend 3 of those up north. It wasn't the Blue Hills, but in a way, I felt like planning a trip back home. The more I thought about it, the more excited I got. A few days before we went, Sam had to go out of town for a business meeting. As was routine, she had to take COVID tests before and after she went. On her way back, she tested positive. She called me alarmingly early in the morning. "I don't want you to catch it," she said. "You go on your own. I know how much you've looked forward to it. I'm sorry." We talked about it, and she convinced me. She would be coming home, and by then I'd be up north. It was the best compromise we could come up with. On the way home, I'd stay a few days at a motel while she isolated. But that was a problem for future me. As the day came, I packed the car, called Sam, and set off down the highway. It felt right. It was weird being without Sam, but I didn't feel alone. She wanted me to experience this, and in a way, it felt like Grandma was with me. I was singing old songs she taught me, and I caught myself glancing up at the sky. The further I got from the cities, the more I could admire them. They were all there all along, waiting for me to come home. Wonderful. What was less wonderful was a 35-minute hike from where I parked my car up to the lodge. Without Sam to help me, I felt myself getting more unsure of myself. Was this even the right way? What if I was lost? Not a lot of people have spent their winters walking through snow that reaches up to their knees. It takes ages to get anywhere. When you're also using a flashlight to navigate up a narrow path and trying not to trip, you get this enormous sense of being exposed. There's something primal in that emotion, but also something inexplicably real about it. When you spent months or years worrying about quarterly reports and budget revisions, being out in the wild gives you perspective. It took me longer than I'd like to admit, finding that lodge. 2 rooms, 4 beds, a small kitchen. No power, but a diesel generator outside and a furnace to stay warm. The lodge was on this small hill on a clearing in the woods. The view was out of this world, reaching for miles. There could have been 100 other lodges out there. I'd never know. I spent a few hours just settling in. I warmed a pot of coffee, cut up a salami, and brought a chair outside. You never get used to how bright the stars really are once you get out of the cities. It felt like coming home after a long day, looking up at them like I used to. And right there, if you look close enough, was the green star. If you don't know where to look, you won't see it. But I've seen it. I've seen it over and over, and I know just where to look. Just like back in the day, it was still there. I couldn't take my eyes off of it. It brought a tear to my eye seeing it again. It took me right back to that night on the ice, fishing with Grandma. Only seen in special places up north, I said to myself. There it is, Grandma. As I blinked away the cold from my eyes, the star was suddenly gone. I looked around and it took me a few seconds to find it again. It gave me an uneasy feeling. Was it really there? It was no brighter than a nightstand lamp. Maybe I was imagining it. Still, there it was. How could I not admire it? I must have sat there for at least 2 hours. My coffee grew cold and my salami was getting frozen. All the while, I just looked at the stars, breathing in the fresh air. It was going to be a good night. It was hard to sleep that night. You don't realize how much you miss hearing certain sounds until they're gone. Someone sleeping next to you, cars honking outside, the buzz of electronics. Take all that away, and you get hyper-aware of every little thing. I stayed up for hours, listening to creaking pines, trees, and branches dancing in the wind. I had slept like this 100 nights, but this time felt different. Something out there was off. The next day, I went for a walk. There was a lake nearby, and I wanted to take a walk across the ice. I packed a bag, brought all my safety equipment, and called Sam. I couldn't get through, unsurprisingly, but I promised myself I'd try again on the ice. In general, it is a bad idea to venture out on the ice alone, but I've done it 1,000 times. This wouldn't be a problem. I brought my ice auger and fishing gear out on the ice. It took me several hours just to get a proper hole in the ice. I set up 2 small baited rods and leaned back with a thermos, listening to an audiobook. I tried giving Sam a call, but it still didn't work. Figures. I sat there in a world of my own for hours. I didn't catch anything, but that was fine. I was at peace, but I still couldn't shake the feeling of something missing. Maybe it was Sam, or my grandma. Maybe it was something else. As the sun started to set, I caught my dinner. I butchered it, put it on ice, and started packing up. As the stars started to twinkle, I heard a chilling noise. A large snap, just beneath me. I froze. I crouched down to better balance myself. Another crack. The ice was thick, but the sound of ice breaking underneath is impossible to mishear. I did what I was taught. I lay down flat to distribute my weight evenly and started crawling back to shore. I made it back to the shoreline, leaving some of my equipment behind. I still had my headphones, but I left the fishing equipment and the fish behind. I just stood there for a few minutes, listening for the ice to crack. It was sudden. In a matter of seconds, the ice broke. All my fishing gear fell through the ice. I recoiled, backing away into the forest. From there, I could see it. The hole in the ice around my fishing spot was perfectly round. Unnaturally so. That wasn't the end of it. On my way back to the lodge, I heard a loud snap from a nearby pine tree. It fell over just a few feet ahead of me. If I hadn't stopped to check my cell coverage, that thing would have broken my neck. I heard other suspicious noises all throughout the evening, and the relaxing wind in the pine trees started sounding more sinister. I made myself another pot of coffee and brought out the last piece of my salami, but this time it felt like I was just doing it to watch my back. I debated whether or not to spend another day there or not, and I was leaning towards not. Sam would agree. That night, the stars were brighter than ever, and right there, brighter than all, was the green star. I couldn't look away. It was like trying to avoid the sun. It just burned into my eyes, through my eyelids. It seemed to go brighter by the second, and I had to hold up a hand to block it. I closed my eyes, held up my hand, and waited. I was obviously having some sort of moment. That settled it. I was going back in the morning. As I took down my hand, I lost my breath. The green star was closer. It was as big as my fist and close enough for me to see the surface. A squirming, moving surface, like breathing clouds in the distance. It was a glowing ball in the sky, bright as the moon, colouring the entire hillside in a wash of green. It was a thick light, so potent that it felt like I could taste it. It had a strobe effect, making my moving hands look like they lagged behind my thoughts. I could feel myself pushing through it, like a physical force. It was blinding and unreal, like a fire in the sky, making me hot enough to sweat. I got up from my seat, staring at myself near blind. I snapped out of it. I looked away. The edge of the forest was lined with creatures. Deers, hare, foxes, even a few domesticated animals like chickens, cows, and dogs. And in the back, behind all other creatures, were people. Naked, broken people. Some pale as ice, others gored beyond recognition. One person in particular stuck out to me. A young woman with a broken neck and a rat-eaten body. No stomach, no fingers, no toes. A wide-open mouth at an impossible angle. No tongue. Dead, winter-green eyes. They all stood there in the distance, looking at me from the edge of the tree line, all bathed in the green light of the star above. I picked up my car keys and ran them between my fingers. I needed to feel something. I needed to feel that this was happening. Once I realized it was, my breath got caught in my throat. I was locked between fight or flight, and I didn't know what was what. But the warmth from the green star was real. Whatever I did next would be real. I turned to run. There she was. I almost ran straight into her, the woman with the broken neck. It was as if the tree line had moved closer. The light was more intense than ever. All around me, silhouettes were closing in. I backed up against the wall of the lodge, the broken bodies closer and closer. In the light of the green star, they all looked hollow. In a pained groan, they reached out towards me. Man, animal, and everything in between. I fell to my knees, scrambling for balance. I screamed myself hoarse, scratching at the wall of the lodge like a cornered animal. My fingers were buried in blood and dirt, my nails nearly bending backwards from the effort. There had to be something, anything. In my head, my screams were a desperate prayer to anyone and anything. I felt a cold hand on my leg. I was crying. My tears tried to shield me from seeing what was really happening. And there, something. A something. A small, cast-iron key. The same my grandmother once had given me to play with. I held it tight and felt the cold return. Curled up in a fetal position, I laid in the snow and cried until my eyes were raw. I would never look at the stars the same again. The next day, I went home, numb. I know for a fact that not everyone can see the green star. Sam has never seen it, and even other people I know from up north have never seen it. But as my grandma used to say, it takes a special place and special people. Don't look too closely. Question what you see and force yourself to look away every now and then. I got back home to Sam, but I didn't know how to tell her. I still don't. I don't know what I really saw, but I don't want to see it ever again. I lost my job at the start of the COVID pandemic, and I started spending a lot of time online. I got stuck in a lot of online rabbit holes. At one point, I spent an entire weekend looking at flat earth videos. I've looked at pretty much every online conspiracy board, and I'm pretty sure I'm on a watch list somewhere. Once I got a new job, I left that life behind me, except for a few friends I made along the way. Most were just curious people, not the kind of crazy radicals one might imagine. A surprising amount of them were ordinary people with a skeptical mind. They weren't the kind of people who got stuck on crazy ideas just for the hell of it. They were the kind of people who liked to see how the sausage was made, so to speak. As I cleaned up the remnants of my crazy and unemployed lifestyle, I noticed most of my friends and acquaintances were already off chasing a new random trend: static chasing. I didn't pay any attention to it. Over the months that passed, I zoned out a lot of what they were doing. I disappeared off all the mailing lists, all the subreddits, Facebook groups, Discord chats, all of it. I started getting back a semblance of an ordinary life. Looking back, it was a bit embarrassing. When you've got nothing but hours of anxiety on your hands, you get desperate to fill it with something. But as things returned to normal, I tried putting all that time behind me and moving on. I got the occasional message still. A few people were genuinely worried about me or curious. But eventually, those all stopped too. That was until last October. Mags was one of the most grounded and well-researched people I knew from that time. She was a moderator on various boards. She was the kind of person who just loved to ask questions and spark a conversation, even if it pissed people off. She could toss a question into a group of people like a hand grenade and just watch as the sparks flew. She was mean, but never too mean, and it was always done with a sparkle in her eye. So when she messaged me 4 months after we stopped talking, I knew something was up. Her message didn't help either. "Help me," it said. A text message to my private phone. I didn't even know she had my number. At first, it didn't bother me. I felt a bit bad, but I tried putting it behind me. Mags was one of the few people I genuinely liked from those days, and we'd spent more than one night online just talking about everything and nothing. To her, every rabbit hole was just a new way to look at old questions, and that was all she was looking for. New paths for her mind to wander. Still, I tried not to think about her. I was moving on. Then there was that time where a friend of mine cancelled our plans. I'd set aside my entire night to go see a movie, but suddenly I was wide open. Pissed, I got back online and looked for something to watch. Some YouTube videos, anything. Mag's last message came creeping back into my mind, and I found myself opening a few tabs. I knew for a fact that the last thing she'd been into was static chasing, but what was static chasing? Who were the static chasers? What did it all mean? If you don't know, you're in for a ride. Jesus Christ, these people are something else. When there's no broadcast, or when there's a loss of signal, an older TV defaults to showing a static murmur of black and white dots, background radiation. A lot of modern TVs instead default to a black or blue screen, but some still show it. Today, kids are growing up without having to ever see it. I never really thought about static going away. Back in the days before digital TV, static was just part of watching TV. My brothers and I called it the War of Ants, where we tried seeing whether the black or white dots were the most numerous. But nowadays, static is different. It doesn't show as much. So there are these people called static chasers who pride themselves in finding traces of static in pretty much anything analog. They post pictures of their finds, they share fun anecdotes, and they seem to genuinely enjoy the sound. There's something about the burst of static that just can't be explained to someone who's never heard it. Try to remember. When did you hear it last? So I found a few sites dedicated to static chasing. Back down the rabbit hole. Facebook groups, YouTubers, sketchy Patreon unlocks, the whole shebang. It was like a phantom limb growing back into my brain. I knew these roads. I'd travelled there before. It wasn't until I found the Static Chaser subreddit that I started getting worried. Not because of the amount posted or what they posted, no, the opposite. It was basically abandoned. 46,000 members, 2 people browsing the subreddit. All mods were removed. No stickies, locked posts. The place was abandoned. Still, the last post was just a couple of weeks old, and before that, there were dozens of posts and even more comments every single day. Something had happened there. I tried looking for Mags's username, but I couldn't find it. She had dozens of backups, but there was nothing. I just started browsing a few topics leading up to the abandonment of the community, and it was just spooky. I tried staying in front of it like you said, one commenter had posted. It really does change, but you gotta be there for hours. Is this safe? That was their final post. No responses. Other posts hinted that there was a new trend among the static chasers. They were tuning their old TVs to frequencies with heavy static and just sitting in front of them. Some people posted Instagram pics of having a coffee and biscuits in front of a static screen. Others posted their cats sleeping on top of their thick screens. This was a community with thousands of people who all just shared an interest. Some did it for fun, but others seemed to have a genuine interest. But going back just a little, I noticed a small trend. People posting their blots. Blots are what happens when the static lines up into a big black spot in the middle of the screen. This is extremely rare. This was a subgroup within the static chaser community, people looking for rare patterns. Some tried to find deeper meaning in it, while others just liked discussing where the patterns came from. The patterns themselves usually just manifested in the blink of an eye, but high-speed cameras could catch them. There, among people talking about their blots, was a username I'd recognize anywhere. Mags. I don't get it, she posted. Static is just supposed to be background radiation, so why does it have a fucking head? She had posted a lot about finding blots and patterns. She'd posted pictures, videos, sound files, links to collective folders, all kinds of stuff. And I gotta say, some of the stuff she posted was downright creepy. The outline of a six-fingered hand pressing against the screen, a perfectly white circle. One image just straight up looked like an eye, but the final one was probably the creepiest. The screen was entirely white, with the outline of a humanoid figure. No static. It stayed like this for 15 seconds, she'd posted. I sent her a few messages. Mags was the kind of person to get roped into all kinds of weirdness. While this was one of the weirdest things she's been into, it still wasn't as bad as some of the anti-vaccination stuff she looked at, or the "our government is run by reptiles" thing. Then again, all of that was just curiosity. Here she was writing guides and posting pictures. She dug up an old TV just to try it out. This had gotten to her. What had she seen? A week passed, and I didn't get any answers. She wasn't online. She wasn't anywhere. By now, I was getting worried. I tried to call her on the number she'd texted, but I got nothing. I tried looking her up, but she had pretty much nothing of her private life linked anywhere. She was terrified of getting doxxed. But I was also curious. There had to be a reason she was so into this, and her guides were pretty straightforward. Something in me pushed me to at least give it a shot. So I dug my mum's old CRT TV out of storage, cleaned it up, and plugged it in. I had Mags's guide on my laptop. There were ways to do this with other devices than a TV, but an old TV was the simplest. You needed a powerful magnet. You had to know where the flyback transformer was located, and you had to face a screen east or west, depending on if the transformer was to the left or right of the heatsink. After that, you had to set a specific channel based on your nearest physical TV station, an OTA broadcast station. There was a list of them attached in a folder. In my area, rural Minnesota, the channel was to be set at 0506. Finally, the magnet was to be put directly beneath the flyback transformer, but dampened by about half an inch of hardwood. I followed the instructions, but the payoff was underwhelming to say the least. Just a blast of static, white and black dots fighting for supremacy, a monotone burst of sound. But then again, the final part of the guide was to simply wait. It could take hours. I left it all on and went on with my day. I left the house for a short while to get some groceries, but apart from that, I was just in the other room, reading up on what to expect. Apparently, after being tuned to the channel for a few hours, the static would start rearranging into recognizable patterns. Just strange things picked out of the air. Silhouettes, patterns, sounds, something. After a few hours, I sat down in front of the TV and just waited. It was getting dark, and the October rain was relentless. Trees were moving outside my window, and I was feeling a bit vulnerable. I huddled up in a blanket on my couch, imagining what had caused Mags to send me that message. Where had all the static chasers gone? What was I really expecting? Some kind of message? An answer? I dozed off a few times. It was boring, and I didn't really see anything. It was a bit like cloud watching. You just started imagining things after a while. Still, Mags wasn't the kind of person who would get freaked out by cloud watching. Something must have spooked her. As it was getting close to midnight, I gave up. I got down from the couch, leaned over, and reached for the TV. Then, I saw something. It wasn't big, just a small black dot, but it was unmoving. While the static of white and black roared, there was this small black spot that just stuck there. As I leaned closer, I could sort of make out a shape. Kind of. And there was this sound in the static, like a high-pitched noise laid on top of it. The spot grew larger, and I started to see it clearer. It was humanoid. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, completely ink black. It was moving against the static, growing larger as it came towards me. The high-pitched noise grew clearer. Finally, as the figure was as large as my hand, I heard it. It was talking, barely breaking through the roaring static. Hello? I freaked out. My first reaction was to just run, but I suppressed it. Instead, I turned the TV off. The second I touched the knob, something surged through me. It might have been a spark or a sudden spike of electricity, but whatever it was, it left me numb. My eyes went black, and as I was laying on my back, I started panting. I couldn't see. No matter how much I blinked or adjusted my eyes, it was all just black. I rubbed them, slapped myself, tried to control my breathing, but there was nothing. Slowly, I started to realize something. This wasn't my floor. I ran my hands across the ground and it was just nothing. I felt nothing, I saw nothing. I wasn't warm or cold or hurt. I could feel my body moving, but it wasn't really a feeling or emotion. I remember forcing myself to have a conscious thought, just to know I was still alive, but that was all I could do. I was a brain, floating in nothingness, imagining myself having a body. I felt sick, or I thought I felt sick. Maybe it was the memory of sickness, or a creeping panic. In the distance, there was a light. I felt drawn towards it. Slowly but surely, I could feel myself moving towards it as I imagined my legs carrying me. Still, I felt nothing. I was sending the signals, but there were no limbs there to respond. My body just wasn't there. Then, as I got closer to the light, I felt parts of me returning. I could look down and see my hands. They weren't whole, as they blink in and out of existence in bursts of static, like a texture printed on my skin. They were translucent, and so thin I could pass one hand through the other with just a little force. I wasn't completely physical, but the closer I got to the light, the more whole I became. The light, floating like a sun in a starless universe, was a sphere. A big white and black sphere, exploding with static patterns. Black and white, dancing across the surface. There was a noise coming from it, growing louder in my head. It was static, but not just a noise. I could hear through it. I could decipher it. A million voices. Old arguments, whispers, promises, cries. People. There were people there, inside the sphere, and it was all just noise. Pointless, mortal noise. Remnants of conscious thought. I got closer. It dawned on me that the sphere was actually white, with black spots appearing and reappearing. But it wasn't just spots. As I got closer and closer, I realized they were silhouettes. Every single spot, a person, all stuck within the static. Millions, maybe billions. I turned around. From the glow of the sphere, I looked out into the darkness. It wasn't a void. It was a mass of creatures, so vast it covered my entire field of view. A universe of ravenous things. Some humanoid, some not. Some spoke, some screamed, some cried, but they were all there, and they were coming for me. A universe of the unspeakable. My eyes burned with static. My ears filled with screams of unimaginable despair, terror, hopelessness, inevitability, mortality. Something reached for me. Hands tore at me from all sides, some to drag me into the sphere, others to tear me apart and devour me. Nothingness at one side, eternity at the other. I tried to scream, but my lungs weren't there. Instead, all that escaped my mouth was more static. Words spoken by those long since past. Screams within screams within screams. I was joining the choir, forever. In a sudden burst of light, there was a loud bang. I fell backwards as the transformer exploded. There was a power outage, and I was back in front of my TV. A millisecond had passed at most. I laid there on the floor, crying, screaming. That place was real. I'd been there. My fingers were numb, and my entire body was still trying to find itself. I screamed and screamed and screamed, but all I heard was static. My neighbours called the police. I have no memory of being taken to the hospital. I barely remember my brothers coming to see me the next day, and I didn't even protest when the doctor labelled it all a mental lapse. They thought it was some sort of epileptic seizure. It took me days to even speak again. By that point, I was at my younger brother's place, curled up in a blanket on his couch. I forced myself to have a conscious thought, to feel that I was alive. I had to. Is this what happened to Mags, I thought? What about the others? Memories of that space forced itself into my mind, and I just started screaming again as my mind went back into blank, anxious panic. It's been a couple of months. I've tried writing this down piece by piece, but it takes time. I get this awful anxiety, like I'm going back into the void, like I'm bound to go there, to join the others, to lose all conscious thought and just turn into emotion and noise. I get these awful panic attacks and I cry myself to sleep. I sometimes just break apart, begging whatever gods may be not to bring me back. I once got an attack so bad, I pissed myself in a Walmart. I'm on sick leave and I'm seeing Dr. Jane, a therapist, but she just focuses on the wrong things. I don't know. She's an odd one. I found the static chasers. Well, at least the stories about them. Mags died from electrocution. She and about 24 others. In Singapore, 4 people died all at once at a viewing party. 2 Germans died from electrocution while sitting next to a battery-powered radio. I think the only thing that pulled me back was the shitty wiring on that TV and my apartment. That power outage saved my life. Without it, I'd be gone. I'd have been pulled in, along with the rest, stuck in that sphere or pulled apart, forever static, forever, actual eternity. Still, something of mine is still there. I feel it, and whenever I hear static, I can still sort of decipher it. I can see the black spots in the patterns as remnants of people waiting for me to return. I can feel their pull. I'm sorry I couldn't help you, Mags. I'm sorry. I don't know what to do. For the love of God, for the love of everything good and warm, please, please. I can't go back. I can't live with this. A few weeks ago, I was at my sister's wedding. She got married in a ski lodge near the Gulf of Alaska, southeast of Anchorage. It was a pretty small community around a lake called Perch Pond. I doubt anyone has ever heard of it. I'd highly recommend it as a wedding spot if you ever wanted a surefire way to greatly inconvenience over 50 people. Still, I can't complain about the lodge itself, or the nearby area. I got my own log cabin and it was freshly stocked with firewood. Hell, even the beds were made with fresh sheets. After a long day of drinking, dancing, ceremony and camera flashes, I found myself sitting outside my cabin with a cigarette in hand. Down by the lake, I could still hear some of the other guests dancing like idiots to 90s pop songs. 2 of my cousins kept dancing in a circle out on a rickety old jetty. Still, it made me smile. If I ever get married, I'd want that too. People dancing and singing long into the night. Not me though. I don't like to dance. I must have nodded off, as the music had stopped when I woke up. It was still dark out. I was stiff and cold, so I went inside to light a fire in the stove. Sure, setting fire to anything when you're inebriated is a bad idea, but they'd prepared it and made it easy for me. I got the sense that this area was no stranger to drunken city folk. As the firewood in the stove lit up, I noticed a strange puddle by the window. Melted snow? No. Blood. I didn't get a chance to think about it before a wet hand covered my eyes. Not my mouth, just my eyes. Quiet, little wheat, a bright voice whispered. I want to talk. It was hard to tell who this person was. It was a bright and feminine voice, but there was a depth to it, a dryness. I was so shocked that I didn't know what to do, like a deer in the headlights. The wet hand terrified me, but there was also a pressure on my neck. She might be able to kill me with the twist of an arm. I could feel something wet and muscular against my throat. My body was shocked into submission. I saw you, she said. I saw you looking. I didn't know what to say, so I just held my breath. Her voice pierced my head, cutting through the sound of my panicking heartbeat. Why didn't you join them? She asked. I don't like dancing, I whispered back. No, she complained. You must. Sing, dance, drink, and make merry. You're alive. You must. Okay. You don't understand. There was a scuffling noise, like something large unfurling and spilling onto the floor. The grasp on my neck grew stronger, and I was getting a strange pounding in my throat. I was just an inch of pressure away from struggling for air. So many wish for your place. So many wish to dance and drink. You're wasting your opportunity. I'm sorry. So many mothers praying to hold their daughters one more time. So many fathers want to tell their sons of their care. So many lonely hearts longing to dance and love. Don't you see? See what? The voice crept closer. The mouth speaking sounded dry, like leather. Nothing comes back. No matter how much you pray, no matter how much you love, nothing, once gone, comes back. Something large swung around my stomach and underneath my legs like a long, boneless arm. I couldn't see anything past the wet hand covering my eyes. I forcefully sat down on the hardwood floor, and I could hear the intruder moving all around me. I heard plates rattle on the stove, and at the same time, there was wet skin rubbing against the glass window in the back of the room. It was at least 10 feet of space between those two spots, so either there were several intruders, or she was massive. You don't know when your time comes, or understand what happens once you cross over, she continued. But you can't come back. You can't dance, drink, and make merry. Use your time well. It's a gift rarely given. I'm happy, I said. Please, just don't hurt me. Hurt you? She seemed surprised. Little wheat, I'm asking you to count your blessings. The slithering noise grew stronger, skin against the hardwood floor, dragging itself along. I could feel the arms and the weight around me shift, but the wet hand was still covering my face. You're a seed, planted in the dark soil of the earth's blood. You're growing, your stalk waving in the ethereal wind of the beyond. But make no mistake. Make no mistake. She inhaled for 8 seconds straight. There was a slight wheezing sound, like something was blocking her lungs. There weren't multiple intruders, just this one, an enormous one. I had trouble wrapping my mind around it. I could barely hear my own shallow breaths. The body will be threshed, and the grain of the soul will be harvested. Yours and all others. Your beings, your memories, your loves, to be consumed and repurposed. Everything you've known, an infinitesimal kernel to be forgotten. What? What are you saying? I'm saying to enjoy the sun and the summer of rains, little wheat. To enjoy the warmth, for what comes after is not for you. Are you going to kill me? The question caught her off guard. The limb that slithered around my stomach tightened. Do you imagine me unfair, little wheat? You're talking about death, about killing. You're threatening me. I'm singing a song to a houseplant, telling a story to an attentive cat. Little wheat, I'm just a farmer's hand passing through your golden field. You're not ripe yet, but I cherish you nonetheless. The voice crept closer. I could feel the warmth of their words against my cheek. I love you, little wheat. A light kiss on the side of my mouth, edges of cold lips being big enough to cover my face. So careful. Then let me go. Yes, of course, she whispered. You must ripen. Are you going away? Until the harvest. Please, just, what does it mean? I don't understand. You're exactly what you were born to be, little wheat. I will care for you. I don't understand. As I raised my voice, the limbs tightened across my neck and chest, and all of a sudden, the hand in front of my eyes disappeared, and the world exploded with colours. I could barely see. My eyes were blurry and red from being held shut. I was held at least 2 feet off the ground, hanging in midair. My legs flailed helplessly. I didn't see any details, but I saw enough. A pile of red, black, and gore, with pieces of white bones sticking out like charred butterfly wings. Numerous skulls emerged. I could see the silhouette of their empty eye sockets like holes of a honeycomb. Organs and chunks of dozens of people melted into a being not of this world. Dozens of pairs of lips sewn into a grotesque grin, mismatched and horrifying. I couldn't stop gasping, as if my body couldn't contain enough air for the scream this terror demanded. I'll come for you, she smiled, little wheat. I was thrown out of the cabin, shoulder first. I burst through the front door, my body exploding with pain. I broke my arm and sprained my neck. The door was knocked off its hinges. I rolled around in the snow and barely had the time to realize what was even up or down before I caught a glimpse of the creature, still inside the cabin. Dozens of blurry skulls met my gaze as the cabin burst into flames. The other guests came to my rescue. For the first hour, I couldn't do anything but scream. Later, I rambled about what's happened, but they all thought it was just me having some sort of drunken mental breakdown. They thought I'd fallen asleep while making a fire by the stove. No one listened to my words. No one tried to understand me. In fact, they were so distracted by me that no one would know that the jetty down by Perch Pond had collapsed, and that 2 people were drowning in the freezing water. No one would know until the next day. My 2 cousins, a brother and sister, 7 and 8 years younger than me. That entire weekend ruined my life. Every time I try to enjoy something, I'm second-guessing myself. Am I doing it because I genuinely want to, or because I feel obliged to distract myself with happiness? I have trouble losing myself at the moment. Alcohol helps. I don't know what I met that night, or what it really wanted. I feel like it gave me a gift of some sort, but I can't say what. I don't know where I would be if that night hadn't happened. Maybe it, in some strange way, saved my life. Maybe I really would have set that cabin on fire and fallen asleep if I'd stayed in there. After all, I wasn't ripe yet. It said so. The only thing I have to show that this creature was ever there is the blood. Across my face and stomach, where it held me, I was covered in blood. That's what made the hand that covered my eyes so wet. The doctor thought it was mine from the broken arm, but they never tested it despite my demands. I know it was real. Those words, those thoughts, aren't mine. I don't know how to get past the encounter at Perch Pond. How can I dance, drink, and make merry? I'm just a little wheat. In my hometown of Aurora Falls, there's a yearly event where the fish migrate downstream at the beginning of May. There's a large river running straight through the city centre, allowing bystanders to watch the migration from the comfort of a hot dog stand near the riverbank. The migration is a sign that summer is right around the corner, and a lot of townsfolk stop to watch it. A few vendors tend to stop by, and if you're lucky, there might even be a few games and attractions. It isn't much, but it's one of those things you'll start to miss once you move away. I know I did. When I moved out to study at the University of Minnesota, I started thinking a lot about those old traditions back in my hometown. It was the kind of event that made you feel like you were a part of something, like an in-joke. It was just something that everyone knew the importance of. The yearly migration, or migration day, was just one of those things that outsiders don't get. The year I got engaged, Alan and I decided to travel back to Aurora. I wanted him to see the migration and experience the kind of small town love I'd grown up with. Not that I remember much of those days. He was a bit skeptical at first, like with most things, but the promise of food stands can go a long way. And as a bonus, he loves me. That goes a long way. We arrived on a Saturday morning, having no family left in town. There was nowhere for us to stay except at the one motel in town. After a short walk downtown, Alan and I met the town chaplain. I didn't know him very well, but he was excited to see me. Just seeing a familiar face, like a bird returning to the nest, could get a smile out of most townspeople. I could barely walk down the street without having people stop to ask if it was really me. "I'm so glad to see you," the chaplain said, "following the world downstream right by us, just like the river. What a beautiful tapestry our Lord weaves." I found him charming, but Alan thought it sounded a bit too English majory. You know what I mean. We spent the afternoon with a few drinks, hot dogs, a walk through the nearby hiking trail, and watching the fishermen down at the docks. There was an expectation in the air. Everyone seemed to have plans for the night. Some of the local kids were putting up lanterns along the river. 16 feet across, the kids called out to one another back and forth. They'd probably been promised fireworks. As the evening started to creep up on us, Alan was getting excited. There was just that sense of anticipation in the air. Seeing the shadows pass by the lanterns and seeing the fish jump up and down, there was something natural to it. A reminder that we lived in a fragile system, and that no matter what happened out in the world, there was something tying us all to that one river, in that one little town. As night came around, Alan held me tight. As we watched the oil lanterns light up, there were at least 100 people huddled around both sides of the river. There seemed to be some sort of disagreement with the hardware store owner, Hamed, who had brought powerful spotlights and set them up along the bridge. Some said it just wasn't customary. Others, standing upstream, just didn't like to be blinded. Hamed, on the other hand, didn't care either way. He was there to make a show. As the clock crept up at 9 p.m, we spotted the first shadows. Fish, as big as my arm, slowly made their way down the river. First one, then 8, and soon there were dozens, all hurrying down the river, one splash at a time. On one side of the river, they'd set up a hot dog stand. Some teenagers were drinking and causing a ruckus, but the local sheriff couldn't be bothered to even talk to them, not even after the fireworks started going off. It was all the drama of a small town, all wrapped into one imperfect evening. Alan didn't seem to mind. In fact, he was smiling a bit more than usual. As more and more people were calling it a night, Alan and I stayed by the river. The teenagers rolled off to an after-party. Hamed left his spotlights on and went home to his wife. The hot dog stand closed and the oil lights started going out one by one. Alan and I cuddled up, still watching the fish pass us by. There must have been hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Soon, we were the only ones left. As we decided to head back to the motel, we walked over the bridge. As we passed the spotlights, Alan stumbled on a cord, knocking one of the spotlights into the river. By now, the oil lanterns had gone out. I tried to hurry Alan along, but he insisted on pulling the spotlight back up. Then, he fell off the bridge. One big splash, and he was under the surface. The following minutes were a blur of screams. I could hear him splashing in the water down below, but I couldn't see him anymore. The spotlight that had fallen off the bridge had gone out, and the other lights were angled incorrectly. My screams for help attracted a few locals, but no one could see or hear him. I barely even remember what I did. It all felt so surreal, like it hadn't really happened. One moment he was there, the next moment he was gone. I panicked. Long into the night, all I could do was scream his name. But the strangest thing was the reaction of the other townsfolk. The consensus was that I was overreacting. It was as if they didn't even know who I was talking about. Still, they indulged me and tried their best to check the river. There was nothing. I was taken back to the police station and slept in their waiting room wrapped in a fire blanket. 2 officers stayed with me all night, making sure I was okay. They didn't seem all too worried about Alan. It was more of a reaction to me and my emotional state. Of course I was upset and frustrated that they weren't taking me seriously. In the morning, there was no news of Alan. I got the impression that they'd barely even searched for him. I was so pissed off that I threw the coffee they handed me straight into the wall, screaming in their faces. "Just tell me something," I demanded, as the second officer started picking up pieces of my mug. "Just say what you've tried, where you've looked." "Ma'am, please," said the young officer. "We have several eyewitnesses stating that you came here by yourself." Of course, it was nonsense. I'd been with Alan for years, and there'd been plenty of evidence of the two of us not only being there, but there were plenty of witnesses who'd seen us throughout the day. I just started naming places, people, and what we'd done. It shut them all up for a while. Didn't take them long to start asking questions. One lead after another. It all just turned up nothing. Alan's car was strangely registered to me. They said I'd checked in alone at the motel, and all my things had been moved to a smaller room. The vendor at the hot dog stand swore he'd seen me there, alone. But that's when it hit me. I had paid for the drinks at lunch, so I had a receipt. I always saved my receipts. I shook out every receipt in my purse and went through them all one by one. And when I finally found the receipts from the previous day, I felt my heart skip a beat. There it was, black on white. All of Alan's drinks were gone from the receipt. Impossible. Over the following hours, it became clear that something was wrong. Alan was gone, and no one was helping me look for him. It was as if he just disappeared. Hamed, from the hardware store, didn't even think about one of his spotlights falling into the river. It was as if nothing had ever happened. 2 days passed in Aurora Falls. I tried calling Alan's parents. Their number had been removed from my phone, and they didn't seem to recognize my voice. All our photos were gone from my social media accounts. I called our friends, I called our landlord, I called his work. No one, at any point, had anything to say about him. In fact, some of them didn't even know who I was anymore. It came to a point where I was just standing there, blindly screaming at Alan's former roommate over the phone, demanding they tell me something about him. Anything. Anything at all. They hung up. As night came around, I found myself walking along the river to clear my head. The gentle rushing of water cleared my head and gave me another chance to reflect on what was really going on. My panic had subsided to a sort of surrendered desperation. I was frustrated beyond anything I'd ever experienced, but at the heart of it was a restlessness. If Alan had washed up on the shore somewhere or gotten stuck or hurt, someone had to find him at some point. Still, the river reached all the way down to the next town over, Tomskog, and there was no way for me to check all of it on my own. After an eternity of walking, I just sat down by the river and cried into my phone. I had water up to my knees, but I didn't care. Coverage was long gone, but that little light in all that dark was a surprising amount of comfort. My background picture of me and Alan was gone. Some kind of factory reset. My sobs were interrupted as I felt something brush against my leg. The migration was still going strong, it seemed. It was pitch black out, so I turned my phone towards the river. There was no fish. It was bodies. They were floating downstream like a solid mass. Dozens, maybe hundreds. All with their faces turned down, shoulder to shoulder, not a muscle moving. Some naked, some fully clothed, some with broken accessories clinging to their carcass. An old woman with reading glasses hanging at the edge of her nose. A young man still clutching a backpack to his chest. Eyes wide open, faces turned down into the water. Almost surprised, as if they never anticipated losing their lives. Then it hit me. The fish weren't migrating. They were fleeing. They were fleeing whatever the fuck this was. I got to my feet. My leg had brushed against the arm of a young boy wearing swim trunks. He was one of the floaters in the front row. Floaters. Sounds so fucking macabre. I just stared. It felt like my mind was going blind. Like I wanted to burn this image out of my head. Yet, I couldn't. Their eyes were perfect. Diamonds just beneath the surface. All of them are full of forgotten life. Then, a thought struck me. A terrible, gut-wrenching thought. Alan. I followed the rows of floating people, muttering his name over and over. Maybe he was in the back. Maybe he was the last one. Maybe he wasn't even part of this. As I saw the bodies bump into one another, I noticed how eerily quiet it was. No birds, no splashing in the river, just me, my runaway breathing, and a hammering pulse that was forcing tears into my eyes. I couldn't find him. I looked 5 times over, following the stream of bodies, but there was nothing. He wasn't there. Still, I felt no relief. As I picked up my cell phone to film it all, the screen started burning with static. Black and white spots, physically burning into the display of the phone. I was so surprised I dropped it. Just as well. It had grown so hot, it was smoking in a matter of seconds. Then, on the riverbank, it combusted. A tiny metallic scream. Another death. Then, a noise. I couldn't tell what it was. I barely even knew where I was. I just blindly followed the river upstream. The tree line was close enough for bushes to block my path, but not so close that I couldn't get around them. Vegetation was sparse enough for me to see a close to 11 feet tall figure standing downstream, watching the bodies pass by. The figure was dark, not just because of the hour of day, but in essence and colour. It was darker than night, like an ink blot on grey paper. Like a shepherd watching his sheep, it lingered along the river. As I looked at it, it bent down to push one body who got stuck, almost lovingly. Right next to this ungodly being was an ordinary person, a stranger. Once the two noticed me, the uneven pair locked their eyes on me. The large being didn't seem to mind, but the person next to it kept staring at me. From afar, they called out to me, like a frat boy yelling at an acquaintance from across the parking lot. "Are you looking for someone?" A man's voice, one I'd never heard before. I just nodded as the man walked up to me. The tall figure didn't move. Instead, it just kept ferrying the bodies along. "Who are you looking for?" the man asked. As he got closer, I got a better look at him. Large, broken glasses, barely hanging on by a frame. He was staring at me with large, empty eyes. Part terrified deer, part ravenous wolf. He had a shattered arm, as if he'd been hit by a car. He was pale and death, soaked in water. Another victim or a victim to be. His feet squished as he adjusted himself. He only had a single shoe. My fiancé, Alan." "All right," nodded the stranger, his head wobbling back and forth. Maybe his neck muscles were failing him. "What does he look like?" I swallowed hard and threw a glance at the large being in the back. It paid us no mind. I could see the end of the trail of bodies further upstream. Alan wasn't there. "Doesn't matter," I stuttered. "He's not here. Just let me go. I'll leave." "Oh, you can go. Alan too," said the strange man, a squirt of water escaping his open mouth. "Just humour me. What does he look like?" Then it hit me. I had no idea. This is where I have to admit something. At the time of writing, I know little to nothing about Alan. Alan isn't even his real name. I can't tell who he was, what he looked like. I have no idea where we met, and I can't remember the names of the people I called to find him. And standing there, in front of a drowning victim, I choked on my words. Talking about Alan had been the easiest thing in the world, but it felt like someone had thrown a blanket over my mind. "How do you even know you've lost someone?" he asked. "How can you miss what you can't remember you ever had?" "That's not it," I huffed. He was here. We were together. We watched the migration. Who? I shook my head. Who what? Who was here? And that was the first time. I couldn't remember his name. I hadn't even noticed how my engagement ring was gone. There wasn't even a mark left behind. I sank to my knees. I knew there was something there in my heart, missing. I felt it. My body remembered something that I didn't. Yet, I couldn't think of a name or a face. I didn't know where we'd first met. I remember meeting someone at some place, but that was it. Please, I cried. There has to be... Something, asked the man. Something to make it all fair? No, little wheat, there isn't. Just walk away. What is this? What's going on? A harvest in spring, nodded the man. Same routine as last year. Who are you? I asked. I think you know, he answered. But I didn't. I blinked, and suddenly the giant figure towered above us. With the flick of an overgrown finger, a large spike pierced the neck of the drowning victim. In an effortless move, he was thrown into the river, sinking into the back of the line, face first. The broken glasses fell off and sank to the bottom of the river, but his one shoe stayed put. The figure looked down on me. I've never felt so small. I forgot to breathe. I've never felt a presence like that. It was beyond fear. I was questioning my very place here, my world, my life. It felt like the namesake I'd been given, like little wheat. The figure reached out with a large finger or a claw. Something sharp gently touched my forehead. It wasn't even fast, but I didn't know how to act. I just held my breath, hoping against hope to pass out before I got to experience the pain I knew was coming. I didn't want to float downstream with the others. I was even having a hard time caring about Alan. Then again, what Alan? Hello, the creature said. My world turned upside down as I fell into a dreamless sleep. The next day, I was found by a couple walking their Rottweilers. I was brought to their home and given plenty of fluids and aspirin. They wrapped me in blankets, cared for me, and called the police. Of course, nothing would come of it. I'd been established as an unstable individual, screaming about make-believe and imaginary people. There was no way I could tell them about the previous night without sounding like a maniac. Instead, I had a quick checkup and then I returned to the motel. I packed my bags, got the keys to my car, and prepared to go back home. I would never come back to Aurora Falls again. Even though, as of writing this, I don't think I'm even angry about it anymore, though I know that I should be. I think a lot of people have lost a lot of love in Aurora Falls. I think once you have, you move out. But that makes me wonder, what made me leave my hometown all those years ago? It couldn't just have been my studies. I had family there. Or did I? Was I an orphan? How can I know? For sure. I'm writing this all down as I found my bag from that weekend stuffed away in the attic, and I want to put this all to paper before I forget what is left of it. There was this one thing I found at the bottom of the bag that kicked all of this back into my head. Remember the drowned man with the large glasses and only one shoe? The one who ended up as the floating body on the far end? At the bottom of my duffel bag, just beneath my favourite pair of jeans, I found his other shoe. Austin Harroof was born on December 21st, 1996, to a dentist and a pharmacist. In 2010, when Austin was 13 years old, his parents suddenly got divorced, and in the same year, they got into a new relationship with a new girlfriend and boyfriend. Although this was a complete shock to Austin and his 1 year younger sister Haley, they adjusted to this sudden change. The kids stayed with their mother in the same house, with the father moving out into a nearby house with his new girlfriend. About a year after this event, Austin entered high school and he immediately made a mark. He was excelling in education, and because of his big athletic build, he he was engaged in rough physical sports. Despite his size and willingness for rough sports, Austin was never an aggressive guy, and he enjoyed helping people. After high school, he was accepted into the Florida State University 4-year pre-med program, just as he wanted, and at the end of that summer, packed all of his stuff and moved into the university dorm to live the life he had dreamed of. His university life started on a high note, with him getting a girlfriend, and excelling in his studies as always, and getting into bodybuilding. He managed to establish a decent social media following, as he made content regarding fitness and bodybuilding on it. Despite working well, he was constantly angry at himself for not making friends. He thought he was very shy and people didn't like him. This pushed him into drug abuse, and he abused them so much that he started questioning his sanity. The next summer, Austin returned home for his vacation, and the family immediately noticed that something was wrong with his behaviour. He shifted his bed to the hall, saying that his bedroom was filled with demons. He also marched around the house at night, knocking on the doors loudly, saying that he was protecting them from demons. His family strongly believed that these behavioural changes were because of his drug abuse, and with their best efforts, prevented him from using them again. It appeared as if all their efforts were useless, as Austin's behaviour never changed. So they decided to use something called the Baker Act, whose guidelines are as follows. Reason to commit someone Baker Act. Based on the instability of a person's mental illness, Baker Act is based on a person's instability in their mental illness. They would qualify if they become a danger to themselves or others. Involuntary hold time. A person who is Baker Acted will be involuntarily held in a psychiatric unit for 72 hours. What happens after? Any treatment that is sought after the 72 hours is voluntary. They cannot be forced into a long-term program. However, before they could use it, something tragic happened. On the morning of August 15th, Austin turned up in front of his best friend's house. When he opened the door with excitement, Austin asked him what was the year of his birth. When he said 1996, he walked away. Austin's friend was confused by this and called him in a couple of minutes to check if he was okay. Austin was completely fine while he spoke to him on call, and the duo decided to meet Austin's sister and all of their other friends. The place decided as their meetup spot was a nearby beach. While they were almost at the beach, Austin told them that he had some work at the house, promised to turn back soon, and left them. In a few minutes, Austin turned back just as promised, but in a strange outfit. Under the scorching heat of the sun, Austin was wearing a thick jersey with woolen sweatpants. He was also wearing 2 wristwatches with a pair of sunglasses. His friends immediately started ridiculing him for the strange outfit, and within a few moments, he warned them to kill them on a serious note. His friends grew frightened and stopped ridiculing him at once. The incident greatly cut short the time he spent with his friends, and Austin, his friend and his sister, decided to leave the beach and join Austin's father and his girlfriend for a meal in a nearby restaurant. On their way to the restaurant, Austin told his sister that he was an immortal, half-human, half-horse. To prove his immortality, he started intentionally walking into the road to get hit by a car. His sister pulled him back on the pavement and walked between him and the road until they reached the restaurant. Once at the restaurant, the trio met Austin's father and his girlfriend, and the group occupied a table at the farthest end of the restaurant. Austin told them that he had the urge to use the washroom and left the table. After returning in a few moments, he left them again, but this time he walked directly out of the restaurant, only to return 30 minutes later in completely different clothing with oil stains all over. During those 30 minutes, he was back at his house drinking vegetable oil and eating Parmesan cheese. His mother ordered him to stop, and thus he changed his clothes and returned to the restaurant. His father was visibly angry because of his behaviour and said something rude to him. Austin lost his cool hearing this and pinned his father to the wall. After a few moments, he let go of his father and walked out of the restaurant. His friend closely followed him, but it appeared as if Austin had disappeared in thin air. His father understood that in his current state, Austin was a threat to society and informed the police right away. 4 miles away, a 50-year-old woman was watching TV inside her open garage, waiting for her husband John, who had taken their dogs for a walk, to return. Michelle and John had been married for almost 20 years and were enjoying their retirement. The couple were well liked by their neighbours, who often visited their house. One of Michelle's neighbours, named Jeff, was relaxing in his house when he heard Michelle scream at the top of her voice. He rushed out of his house to see what was wrong, and when he entered the property, he noticed that Austin was braking Michelle's car right in front of her eyes. Once he was done with the car, he threw Michelle on the ground and started pounding her with his fists. Jeff, who was a well-built guy, ran towards Michelle to save her. When he saw Jeff come near him, Austin separated himself from Michelle and warned him not to step closer. When Jeff kept coming despite his warning, he punched him hard on his head. But Jeff did not succumb to it, and he threw Austin as hard as he could on the ground, hoping to knock him out. With Austin down, Jeff was assessing the situation around him when he felt a blinding pain on the side he was punched, and when he looked around, he noticed he was bleeding profusely. Austin had a knife in his hand when he punched him, and that single blow had caused 5 puncture wounds on Jeff. With Austin back up on his feet, Jeff ran into Michelle's house and locked himself up. Then he called 911, told the police about Austin, and waited for them to arrive, hoping that John would return and save his wife. A few minutes later, Jeff heard Austin walk down the street, grunting like an animal, followed by the screams of a person. When the police arrived, they found John pinned down on the floor by Austin. Austin held Jeff's neck with his left hand, while pinning him down by sitting on his chest. His right hand was inside Jeff's mouth, pulling his cheek out as much as he could, and he was feeding on Jeff's stretched cheek. One of the police officers tried tasting Austin, but it didn't seem to affect him at all. Another officer kept kicking Austin's face, but every time he was kicked, Austin got back from the floor and went back to John to eat his cheek, without harming the police. The canine units were set loose to pull him away from John, but despite the dogs tearing flesh from his arms, he never stopped. Finally, after the combined effort of an officer and a dog, Austin was knocked out for a short period. However, it took the strength of 3 police officers to restrain him. By the time Austin was restrained, Michelle and John were already dried, and within a few moments, Austin fell unconscious. He was in a coma for 12 days, and he had drunk some highly poisonous liquid from the couple's garage thinking it was alcohol. There were no traces of drugs in his blood except marijuana, which wasn't much. This meant that Austin was sober when he committed the grotesque crime. When Austin got out of the coma, he revealed the motive behind his deeds. He told police that when he exited the restaurant, he saw a dark figure with a white face staring at him. The figure kept chasing him as he kept running away from it, and he eventually reached Michelle's house. He approached her to seek refuge, but it was then he figured out that Michelle was a witch, so he killed her. When he was about to leave Michelle's house, he saw the same figure waiting on the doorstep with a dog, and he attacked it to save himself.